Viktor Malenkov pressed his boot into the throat of the wounded American soldier and smiled. Not the smile of a man who had won a battle, the smile of a man who had been waiting years to send a message. He raised his radio and spoke slowly, deliberately, knowing the transmission would be intercepted. "Tell the woman who carries the bullets I remember her father, and I will make her watch while I finish what he could not." Then he pulled the trigger. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel and follow Megan's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. There is a particular kind of invisibility that the military creates for certain people, not through cruelty, not through design, but through assumptions. And for nearly 11 months, Specialist Megan Carter had lived inside that invisibility like a second skin. She was 28 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall. Brown hair she kept tied back so tight it pulled slightly at the corners of her eyes, giving her a permanent expression that people often mistook for blankness, for detachment, for someone who simply did not feel things the way other soldiers felt them. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about almost everything when it came to Megan Carter. But she had worked very hard to make sure they stayed wrong. She served with a joint support element attached to a U.S. Navy SEAL team operating in the Kunar province of eastern Afghanistan, a region of mountains so ancient and hostile that the rocks themselves seemed to carry a grudge. The air up there was thin and cold in summer, and in the winter months, it bit through 3 layers of gear and found the place behind your sternum where your body kept its warmth, and it took to. Megan's official designation was Logistics and Equipment Specialist, Class 2. In practice, what that meant was this: she carried things. She carried ammunition. She carried spare parts for weapons that cost more than most people's homes. She carried medical supplies and radio batteries and the kind of gear that operators needed in the field but didn't want to spend their own energy hauling. She ran maintenance checks on rifles she was never authorized to fire in combat. She cleaned scopes she was never permitted to look through with intent. She logged inventory for equipment she would never be credited with knowing how to use. The SEALs had a name for her. They called her Loader. Not with contempt. To be perfectly fair about it, there was nothing mean-spirited in how they used the name. Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeves, the team's lead sniper, had actually said it to her once with something close to warmth in his voice. "You're the best loader we've had in 3 rotations, Carter," he told her one evening, cleaning his rifle while she performed a maintenance check on the spare kit. "Most people in your slot, they don't take care of the equipment like you do. You treat the gear like it matters." "The gear does matter," Megan said. "Yeah." He looked at her for a moment, like he was trying to figure something out. Then he went back to his rifle. "Yeah, it does." She remembered that conversation because it was the closest Daniel Reeves had ever come to seeing her. Not Loader, not the support specialist. Her. But even then, even in that moment of near recognition, his eyes had slid back to the weapon in his hands, and she had remained exactly what she had always been to this team. Background. Useful background, sure. Competent background. But background all the same. There were 12 operators on the team. 12 men who had been through training that most human beings could not survive, who had earned the right to call themselves what they were through years of suffering and discipline and sacrifice. Megan respected that. She respected it genuinely, without bitterness, because she understood better than most people what it cost to become excellent at something dangerous. She just chose not to show it. She chose not to show a lot of things. Every morning before the team was up, Megan ran the maintenance check on all weapons in the support inventory. 12 rifles, 4 sniper systems, 2 heavy machine guns. She did it with the kind of focused quiet that most people associate with prayer, because for her, in a very real sense, it was. Her hands knew every part of every weapon, the way a musician knows the keys of an instrument they've played since childhood. She could field strip and reassemble Daniel's MK-21 sniper rifle in the dark, in under 4 minutes with cold hands. She had never told anyone that. She had never told anyone a lot of things. Corporal Jake Morales, the youngest operator on the team, had caught her once. She had been running a function check on Daniel's primary rifle, cycling the action with a smoothness that didn't look like the work of someone who merely maintained weapons. Jake had stopped in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. "You handle that like you know what you're doing," he said finally. Megan set the rifle down. "I do know what I'm doing. That's my job. I mean, like you really know what you're doing." She met his eyes, held the look just long enough. "Good morning, Corporal." He left. He didn't bring it up again. But sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, and there was something in his expression that wasn't quite confusion and wasn't quite suspicion. It was closer to recognition, the feeling you get when something almost makes sense but not quite. That was the closest anyone on the team had come to the truth. The truth was this: before Megan Carter was Loader, before she was Specialist Carter, before she was anything the United States military had cataloged and filed and given a designation to, she was her father's daughter. And her father was Sergeant First Class Raymond Carter, United States Army, retired, one of the most respected long-range marksmen to ever come out of the special operations community. A man who had spent 30 years teaching other people how to see through a scope, how to read wind, how to make a calculation in the space of a breath and execute it with the steadiness of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. Raymond Carter had taught his daughter to shoot when she was 9 years old. By the time she was 14, she was outperforming men twice her age on ranges that military instructors used to qualify their best shooters. By the time she was 19, she had turned down 3 competitive sponsorships and 2 invitations to train with precision shooting programs that had produced Olympic-level athletes. She turned them all down because her father had told her something that took her years to understand. The ability to put a bullet exactly where you intend to put it is not a gift, Megan. It is a weight, and the day it stops feeling like a weight is the day it becomes dangerous. She had argued with him about that, the way 19-year-olds argue about things they don't yet understand. She had called it old-fashioned. She had called it unnecessarily heavy. She had said that skill was just skill, that a rifle was just a tool, that she wasn't carrying the weight he wanted to put on her shoulders. Then her father died, and she understood. Raymond Carter passed away on a Tuesday morning in October in the VA hospital in Baltimore from complications following a surgery that should have been routine. Megan was 22. She sat beside his bed for the last 40 minutes of his life, holding his hand, and the last coherent thing he said to her, through the fog of medication and the struggle of a body that was losing its argument with time, was this: "The rifle doesn't define you, sweetheart. What you choose to do with it does. Don't forget that." She forgot it anyway, or she tried to. She buried the rifles. Not literally, she boxed them, wrapped them, put them in a storage unit in Maryland that she paid $60 a month to keep, and then she drove away and spent the next 6 years pretending they didn't exist. She joined the military under a support designation because she had been told the military needed support personnel as badly as it needed operators, and because a support designation would put her as far from a rifle scope as she could get while still feeling like she was doing something that mattered. She thought she was running away from the responsibility her father had tried to give her. She was right. That's exactly what she was doing. What she did not understand, not yet, not for another 11 months of carrying ammunition through the mountains of Afghanistan, was that responsibility, the real kind, the Raymond Carter kind, doesn't care whether you acknowledge it or not. It waits. The morning of the mission, the air had a particular quality that Megan had learned to distrust. It was too still. In the mountains, still air usually meant one of two things: either the weather was about to turn, or something was about to happen that the environment itself seemed to want no part of. She had no evidence for this feeling. It was not tactical information. It was not intelligence. It was the kind of thing she kept entirely to herself, because if she mentioned it to anyone on the team, the most charitable response she would get was a polite. She mentioned it to no one. The briefing that morning had been routine by the standards of the deployment of patrol to a village approximately 7 kilometers north, where local intelligence suggested a mid-level enemy logistics coordinator had been using a family compound as a storage point for weapons and communications equipment. The plan was surveillance and assessment, with a possible call for additional assets if the intelligence proved out. Daniel Reeves would provide overwatch from an elevated position north of the village. The rest of the team would approach from the east. Standard, clean, manageable. "How's the kit, loader?" Daniel asked her as the team staged their equipment, his voice carrying the particular kind of distracted focus that experienced soldiers get when they're mentally running through a checklist. "Everything's clean," she said. "Your primary is 0 to 900. Wind gauge is calibrated. I replaced the scope rings last night. The left one was showing micro wear." He stopped and looked at her. "You notice micro wear on the scope rings?" It was developing unevenly. "Better to catch it before you're downrange." Another of those moments. His eyes on her face, that almost recognition. Then he nodded and picked up his rifle, and that was that. Jake Morales fell in beside her as they moved out. He was 24, from San Antonio, and he had a habit of talking when experienced soldiers would have been quiet. Megan had decided months ago that she liked him for this reason, not in spite of it. "You do that on purpose, don't you?" he said. "Do what?" "Sound like you know more than you let on." She kept walking. "I know what I need to know to do my job. That's not what I asked." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Then my aunt's like that. She's the kind of person who knows exactly where every piece of furniture is in a dark room. You don't notice it until you watch her move through the dark. And then you think, how did she always know?" Megan said nothing. "I think you know where all the furniture is," Jake said. She said nothing. He left it there, but he walked a half step closer to her for the rest of the approach, the way people walk close to the person they trust most in an uncertain room. The ambush began at 11:22 in the morning. Later, when the after-action reports were written, and the intelligence failures were cataloged, and the decisions were reconstructed in conference rooms by people who had not been there, the sequence of events would be described in clinical, organized language that stripped everything human out of it. Here's what it actually felt like. 1 second there was a road, a patrol, morning light cutting hard angles across the mountain terrain. The next second there was a sound that Megan had heard before in training, but never quite like this, the detonation of an IED so close to the lead vehicle that she felt the pressure wave in her chest before she heard the explosion with her ears. A physical thing, a punch from the air itself, and the vehicle was not a vehicle anymore. It was a collection of metal that used to be a vehicle, and there were people inside it who were now experiencing the worst moments of their lives. Contact left, IED North Road, vehicle down. I've got casualties I need. Shooter on the ridge, northeast, 200, nope, 300 meters. The world became noise. Controlled, purposeful noise for the operators who were already returning fire, already moving, already doing the things that years of training had made automatic. For Megan, the noise was also purposeful. She moved to cover. She accounted for the ammunition cases she was carrying. She stayed low. She did exactly what she had been told to do in exactly this situation. And then the second shot came. It came from a direction nobody had covered. It came from a position that should not have been possible, from an angle that required either extraordinary calculation or extraordinary luck. And it found Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reeves in the moment between heartbeats when he was rising to his firing position. He went down, not like in the movies, not dramatically. He simply stopped being upright, and then he was on the ground, and the rifle that had been in his hands was no longer in his hands, and the operators closest to him were immediately moving toward him. But the incoming fire was intensifying from the ridge, and the machine gun team to the east was starting to find range. And there was a moment, just a moment, where the tactical situation turned into something that Megan's experienced brain, the part she had spent years trying to ignore, recognized immediately. They were losing. Without a shooter on overwatch, Without someone to suppress the ridge and take out the enemy commander who was directing the attack from a position 700 meters out, they were going to lose. The vehicles were pinned. The operators were pinned. The machine gun team was going to have angle in approximately 4 minutes, and when it did, Megan was moving before she fully decided to move. She was beside Daniel in 3 seconds. She checked his pulse with 2 fingers there, fast, irregular, but there. The wound was in his left shoulder high, and he was unconscious but breathing. She oriented herself. She looked at his rifle, the Mk-21. The weapon she had cleaned 700 times. The weapon she had zeroed that morning. The weapon she knew the way her father had taught her to know every rifle she touched, not as equipment, but as an instrument, with a specific voice, a specific character, a specific way of speaking to the person behind it. She picked it up. She did not make a speech. She did not have a moment of cinematic hesitation. She picked it up because the alternative was watching her team die, and she was her father's daughter, and Raymond Carter's daughter did not watch preventable death and choose comfort. "What are you?" Sergeant Torres, 3 feet away, returning fire, caught her movement in his peripheral vision, and for 1 full second stopped firing. "Carter, what the? I need you to tell me where the enemy commander is," she said, and her voice surprised her not because it was calm, but because it was the particular kind of calm that sounds like something else entirely. Like competence, like someone who has been in this room before. "Carter, you are not a Torres." She was already moving to Daniel's firing position. "Where is the commander?" He stared at her for 1 more second. Then something shifted in his face, the same thing that happens when a person stops arguing with evidence and starts responding to it instead. "North Ridge, elevated position. Rock formation about 11 o'clock, 7:50 out. He's got a radio and he's directing the machine gun team." "Got it." She settled behind the scope. Here's something that most people do not know about the experience of looking through a precision rifle scope after years away from it. It does not feel like coming home. People say that about skills. They say you come back to them. You remember, muscle memory takes over. And there is truth in that. But it is also more complicated because the body remembers and the mind remembers. But what takes a moment is the reconciliation between the person you are now and the person you were the last time this felt normal. Megan looked through the scope and felt 11 years collapse. The world through the glass was sharp and immediate and entirely familiar, the way a voice on the phone is immediately familiar before you've consciously identified who it belongs to. Her right eye settled, her breathing adjusted without instruction, dropping into the pattern her father had spent 3 years teaching her, the pattern that meant she was ready. The North Ridge, rock formation at 11 o'clock. She found the enemy commander in 4 seconds. He was a large man, well-positioned, using the rock formation with professional competence. He was holding a radio in his left hand and gesturing with his right, and even through the scope at 750 meters, she could read the confidence in his posture. He believed the fight was already over. He was calling it like a play from a position of complete control. Distance, 750 meters. Closer than her initial estimate, she recalculated as she settled her position. Wind from the northwest at what felt like 12, maybe 14 knots, variable in the way mountain wind is always variable. The kind of wind that changes its mind between the moment you read it and the moment the bullet gets there. Uphill angle, which would affect the bullet's arc in ways that her father had spent months making her calculate in her head until the calculation was automatic. She did the math. She did not type it into a device or consult a chart. She did it the way Raymond Carter had taught her to do it, in the quiet space between heartbeats, with the same brain that most people use to remember grocery lists or solve simple arithmetic, repurposed over thousands of hours of training into something that could factor wind and distance and elevation and angle simultaneously, and arrive at a solution that she trusted, not because a machine confirmed it, but because her father had made her right often enough and wrong often enough that she knew the difference. Carter, Jake's voice. He had moved to a position 3 feet to her left, and he was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something between awe and the acute anxiety of a person watching someone do something irreversible. Carter, the machine gun team is going to have angle in about 3 minutes.
I know.
I know, Jake. Silent. Then you've done this before. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. She fired. The first shot changed the sound of the battle. Not immediately, there was a moment, a fraction of a second, where nothing seemed to change. And then the enemy commander dropped. Not fell, dropped, the way a marionette drops when the strings are cut, instantly and completely, and the radio hit the rock beside him, and made no sound that anyone could hear from 750 meters away. But Megan saw it, and she was already cycling the bolt and reading the new wind and adjusting her position because the machine gun team was still alive and still moving. Torres's voice hit. Good God, she hit him. Someone else. Who is that? Who is shooting? It's Carter. Jake's voice, and was something in it that she would think about later. In quiet moments, it was the voice of a person who has just understood something they should have understood a long time ago. It's Carter, stand by. The machine gun team was at the east tree line. 820 meters. Different wind pocket down in the trees, more sheltered. She was going to have to account for the transition. The bullet would hit the tree-sheltered air after approximately 500 meters, and there would be a slight rightward drift. She fired. The first shot missed by approximately 2 feet. Still alive, she cycled, adjusted, breathed. The second shot did not miss. What followed was something that the after-action report would later describe as a systematic suppression of enemy combatant positions across a 12-minute engagement window. The language was accurate and also completely failed to capture what it felt like to watch it happen. For the operators on the ground, pinned and bleeding and watching their position erode, what it felt like was this. Suddenly, the enemy was dying and they couldn't find who was killing them. For Megan, it felt like something she had been told it would feel like. Her father had warned her, the first time you do it for real, he had said, sitting on the porch of the house in Maryland on a warm July evening when she was 17, you're going to feel something you're not prepared for. Not guilt, or not just guilt, it's going to feel like the world shifted. Like the weight became real. She had told him she understood. She had not understood. She understood now. Every time she squeezed the trigger, she felt the weight. Not metaphorically, she felt it in her chest, in her hands, in the part of her brain that was simultaneously calculating bullet trajectories and acknowledging with absolute clarity what those trajectories meant for another human life. She did not become numb. She did not stop feeling. She felt every single one, and she kept doing it anyway, because the alternative was worse, because the alternative had names and faces and families, and they were her team, and she was her father's daughter. 4 targets on the ridge, 2 at the east position. A scout who had moved to a flanking position on the south and nearly made it. She caught the movement in her peripheral vision, shifted her scope, and took the shot at under 500 meters, which was almost uncomfortably close by long-range standards. 12 minutes. When the firing from the enemy positions stopped, not all at once, but in the ragged, uneven way that a fire dies when there's nothing left to burn, the valley went so quiet that Megan could hear Jake breathing beside her. She lowered the rifle. Her hands were completely steady. That frightened her more than the fighting had. Carter. Torres was standing over her. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, and his gear was covered in dust, and he was looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face in 11 months of deployment. She had seen him confident. She had seen him focused. She had seen him angry and tactical and occasionally exhausted. She had never seen him look at her like he didn't know what he was looking at. "Sir," she said, "are you injured?" "No, sir." "How long?" he asked, and she knew exactly what he meant. And he knew she knew, and there was no point in performing confusion. "How long have I been able to do that?" "Yes." She thought about it. She thought about the honest answer, which was all her life, and the answer with appropriate context, which was more complicated. "My whole life," she said, "but I stopped. I thought I stopped." "You didn't stop?" "No," she agreed, "I didn't. Daniel Reeves was being attended to by the team medic. He was conscious again, barely, intermittently, and she could hear his voice across the 30 feet of rubble and dust between them, asking what had happened. She heard one of the operators respond. She heard Daniel say, "Carter? What do you mean, Carter?" And then he went quiet again, and she thought maybe he had lost consciousness. But a moment later, across the distance, she heard him say quietly, to himself, like a man doing math that wasn't adding up the way he expected, "She handled my weapon differently. She always handled it differently." The medevac arrived 40 minutes later. In that 40 minutes, Megan helped stabilize two wounded operators, inventoried and secured the weapons, and performed the post-engagement check on Daniel's rifle, with hands that had finally stopped being entirely steady. The tremor was small. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. She noticed it because her father had told her to notice it. "That's how you know you're still human," Raymond Carter had said. "When it's over and your hands shake a little. The day they stop, that's the day to worry." Her hands shook a little. She took that as a good sign. Jake found her at the edge of what used to be the lead vehicle, sitting on a piece of debris that was the right height for sitting and doing nothing in particular. He sat down beside her without asking which was the right call. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then Jake said, "How did you know you could still do it, after however long it's been?" She thought about that honestly. She thought about the scope settling against her eye and the world going sharp and familiar. She thought about the calculations falling into place like pieces of something that had always been assembled, just waiting for her to look at it. "I didn't know," she said. I didn't have time to not do it." That's not the same as not knowing. She looked at him. 24 years old, this kid from San Antonio who talked too much and noticed everything. "What does that mean?" "It means part of you knew," he said. "Part of you knew the whole time. That's why you took care of the equipment the way you did. That's why you zeroed the rifle this morning. That's why you noticed the scope rings." She looked away. "You were taking care of it," he said. "Even when you were pretending you weren't." The medevac was loud when it arrived, blades and wind and voices, and then the team was moving, and there wasn't time for the kind of conversation that needed time, and Megan was back to carrying things, ammunition cases, medical bags, the weight of what had just happened. But Jake's words stayed with her. Part of you knew. 3 hours after the battle, as the team was processing through the forward operating base, and the questions were beginning questions from command, questions from intelligence, questions that all had the same shape even if they used different words, which was essentially, who are you and why didn't we know? Megan sat in a small room with a metal table and a bad overhead light, and a colonel named Whitfield who had the eyes of a man who spent his career trying to be surprised by things and had mostly succeeded. He was looking at the after-action summary, looking at her, looking at the summary again. "Specialist Carter," he said finally. "Yes, sir. This says you made 11 confirmed engagements in a 12-minute window." "Yes, sir. The longest shot at 820 meters. "Approximately, sir. With a weapon you are not designated to operate in a combat role." "That's correct, sir." He set the paper down. He looked at her for a long moment with those patient, evaluating eyes. "Tell me about your father," he said. And that was when she understood that the running was over. Not because she had been caught, not because she had no choice, but because the moment she had been carrying for 6 years, the moment she finally picked up her father's kind of rifle and used it the way her father had taught her, and felt the weight he had told her about, and carried it anyway, that moment had already happened. She could not unhappen it. She could not go back to being Loader. She could not pretend she didn't know where all the furniture was. She took a breath, and she told Colonel Whitfield about Raymond Carter. Outside, somewhere in the FOB, Daniel Reeves was in the medical tent with a bullet in his shoulder that was going to take months of rehabilitation to fully recover from. And he was reportedly asking with the particular stubborn energy of a man who refused to be entirely incapacitated whether anyone could tell him the precise shot data on the 820-meter engagement because he wanted to understand the wind correction. The medic told him to rest. He kept asking. The medic eventually told him that based on the after-action report, the shooter had applied a correction of approximately 1.5 minutes of angle for the wind transition at the tree line, accounting for the sheltered pocket at the eastern position. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been watching her clean my rifle for 11 months. Yes, sir, the medic said. She always checked the rings. I don't know anything about that, sir. She does the maintenance check on every weapon in the support inventory. Every single day. Sir, you should really. She carried my ammunition for 11 months. Daniel said, and his voice had taken on the quality of a man arriving somewhere he did not expect to arrive. 11 months. Every round in that weapon today she carried them. She loaded them, sir. She carried the bullets, he said, almost to himself. And she knew exactly where every one of them was going to go. In the small room with the metal table and the bad overhead light, Megan finished telling Colonel Whitfield about her father. She told him about the porch in Maryland, about the July evening, about what Raymond Carter had told her the ability to shoot really meant. She told him about the weight. Whitfield listened to all of it without interrupting, which was itself a kind of respect. When she was finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then Specialist Carter. What did you think you were doing when you signed on as a logistics and equipment specialist? She considered the honest answer. Hiding, she said. From what? She thought about it, her father's face. The rifle in her hands this morning, the 12-minute engagement that had rewritten what everybody on that team thought they knew about who she was. She said, from being this. Whitfield nodded slowly. And what do you think now? Megan looked at the table. She thought about Daniel asking about the wind correction from a hospital bed. She thought about Jake sitting beside her on the debris without asking. She thought about the sound of the battle changing actually, audibly changing when she fired the first shot. She thought about her father's hands, old and steady on hers, guiding her aim for the first time when she was 9 years old, and the world was simple, and the weight was still theoretical. I think, she said carefully, that my father was right. About what specifically? About all of it, she looked up. The ability is the weight, and the weight doesn't go away just because you put the rifle down. The colonel looked at her for a long time, then he picked up his pen, and he began to write something on the paper in front of him that was not the same report he had started with. Megan Carter had spent 11 months being the person nobody remembered. She would not spend 11 more, but the larger reckoning, the one she could not yet see from where she was sitting in that metal folding chair under the bad overhead light, was still coming. Because somewhere in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, the shot that had silenced the battle was already echoing. Someone who had been waiting, for reasons that had nothing to do with the battle that had just ended, and everything to do with one that had happened long before Megan was carrying anyone's ammunition. The enemy sniper who had taken Daniel Reeves down was not among the 11 she had counted in the after-action. He had not been in the valley at all. He had been watching from somewhere higher. And when the valley went quiet and the medevac came and went, he lowered his own scope and reached for his radio. She is Raymond Carter's daughter, he said. Static. Then a response, brief and certain, I know. His name was Victor Malenkov. And he had been waiting for this day for 7 years. Colonel Whitfield signed the reassignment paper at 9:47 that evening. He did not make a ceremony of it. He did not give a speech. He slid the paper across the metal table and said, "Get some rest, specialist. Tomorrow your title changes." And that was that 11 months of invisibility ended with a signature and a bad overhead light and a colonel who had the particular efficiency of a man who recognized when a decision was already made and simply needed paperwork to catch up with reality. Megan walked out of that room into the Afghan night air and stood for a moment with her hands at her sides, feeling the cold come down from the mountains the way it always did after sundown, fast and complete, like a door closed. If she breathed it in, she breathed it out. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel something, relief maybe, or the particular lightness of a secret finally released. Instead, she felt the weight her father had described settling across her shoulders like a piece of equipment she had been issued and would now have to carry for the rest of her deployment. Maybe longer. Jake Morales was waiting outside. She should not have been surprised. He was leaning against the wall of the operations building, with his arms crossed and his gear still on, like someone who had decided to wait and had committed to the wait fully, regardless of how long it took. "How'd it go?" he said. "I've been reassigned." He was quiet for a second. "To what designated marksman?" He let out a breath. It wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite relief. It was the sound a person makes when something confirms what they already knew. "Good," he said. "You don't have to wait out here, Corporal." "I know I don't." He pushed off the wall. "How are you doing?" "Not the reassignment." She looked at him. 24 years old, sharp eyes. The kind of person who asked the question they meant, instead of the one that was easier. She had spent 11 months trying not to notice how rare that was. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "That's probably the right answer." They walked back through the phobie in silence that was comfortable, in the way silence can be between people who have been through something together that neither of them has the right words for yet. The base was quiet, the particular late-night quiet of a place that had processed the day's events and was now doing the work of recovery. Generators humming, voices from the medical tent, low and steady. Somewhere, a radio playing something country at a volume that was just below intrusive. At the junction where their paths split, Jake stopped. "Carter," he said. She turned. "For what it's worth, I think your father would have been proud today." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "For what it's worth, I think you talk too much." He grinned. It was the first grin she had seen from anyone in 8 hours. "Yeah," he said. "But I'm right, though." She walked to her quarters. She did not sleep. She lay on her cot in the dark and thought about Viktor Malenkov, whose name she did not yet know, whose face she had not yet seen, who had fired the shot that had taken Daniel Reeves off the battlefield and started the chain of events that had ended with Colonel Whitfield's signature on a piece of paper that changed everything. She thought about him because the intelligence debrief had confirmed what she already suspected: the shot that took Daniel down was not a lucky shot. The angle, the timing, the placement high shoulder, incapacitating but not immediately fatal, positioned to remove the team's primary Overwatch asset without triggering the full defensive response a kill shot would have created. That was not luck. That was understood not just how to shoot, but how to think through the consequences of where a bullet lands. Someone tactical, someone patient, someone who had wanted the team's sniper alive and out of the fight. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then, somewhere around 2 in the morning, she sat up and reached under her cot and pulled out the photograph she carried. It was old, printed on paper that had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases were white. Her father on a range somewhere she didn't know where. She'd found it after he died in his late 30s, eye behind a scope, one hand on the rifle, the other steadied underneath. His whole body aligned with the weapon, the way her body had aligned with Daniel's rifle that morning. She had forgotten she looked like him when she shot. Torres had pointed it out during the debrief. "You looked exactly like Chief Reeves. The way you settled," he'd said, then corrected himself immediately. "Actually, no, you didn't. You look like someone older, more settled." He had not known what he was describing. He had been describing Raymond Carter. She put the photograph away, closed her eyes, did not sleep but rested. There was a difference, and the military had taught her to find it. At 0500 the morning began. At 0530, Daniel Reeves sent for her. The medical tent had the particular atmosphere of a place where people were simultaneously trying to heal and refusing to acknowledge how much they needed to. It smelled of antiseptic and old coffee and the stale air of a space that had too many people cycling through it for the ventilation to keep up. Daniel was in the third bed from the left, sitting up at an angle that was clearly more vertical than the medical staff had approved, with his left arm in a sling and his right hand wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. He looked worse than she expected. The color in his face was off that particular gray-yellow pallor that pain and blood loss leave behind. His eyes, though, were the same as always, alert, assessing. The eyes of a man who filtered everything through the question of whether it was tactically relevant. He looked at her when she entered and said nothing for a moment, just looked at her the way she had caught him, looking at her before that almost recognition, that almost except now there was no almost about it. He had arrived somewhere. She pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down without waiting to be asked. "Chief," she said. "Carter." His voice was rougher than usual, medication probably, or just the wear of the past 20 hours. "Sit down." "I am sitting down." He looked at the chair. Then at her, something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fair enough." He shifted slightly, adjusted the sling with a wince he tried to suppress and didn't entirely succeed. "I asked for your file." She waited. "It's interesting," he said. "What's in it?" "And what isn't, Chief?" He set the coffee mug down. "Your marksmanship qualification scores from basic training. Minimum required standards. Everything else, support certifications, logistics, maintenance quals. All of it exactly what you needed and nothing more." He paused. "Except one thing." She kept her face still. "Your maintenance logs," he said. 11 months of them. Every weapon in the support inventory, logged and maintained at a standard that is, I had the armorer look at them this morning. He said the maintenance level on the long-range systems is consistent with the standard you'd see from someone with advanced sniper training. He looked at her. Not support training, sniper training. The tent hummed with the ambient sounds of a medical facility in a forward operating area. Somewhere behind the partition, a man was having a conversation with a medic in a low voice about something that required patience from both of them. "I took care of the equipment," Megan said. "You took care of it like someone who understood what it was for." "That's my job." His voice was not unkind, but it had the edge of a man who had decided to stop allowing evasion. "I had a bullet put in me yesterday by a shooter who knew exactly what he was doing. He positioned that shot to take me off the board, not to kill me. And the reason that matters is that whoever he is, he knew enough to know that with me down, this team would have a gap." He paused. He was right about the gap. He was wrong about nobody being able to fill it. She said nothing. "I want to know who taught you," he said. "To my father," she said. "Name Raymond Carter. Sergeant First Class, retired. Special Operations Community." She watched his face. "You've heard of him." The flicker in Daniel's eyes confirmed it before he spoke. Something that moved fast, a recognition, then a recalibration, then a very specific kind of attention that didn't look like ordinary focus. "Raymond Carter's daughter," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she heard the conversation behind the partition pause. Resume, pause again. "He trained me," Daniel said finally, "not personally. But the instructor who trained my instructor, Raymond Carter, was where that methodology came from. The wind reading approach, the breath pattern, the way of thinking about the shot as a decision rather than an action." He looked at her with new eyes now, or rather with the same eyes, but finally seeing clearly. "I have been using your father's technique for 8 years. And I never," he stopped himself. "You've been carrying my ammunition for 11 months. Yes, and cleaning my rifle, and zeroing my optics. Yes." He picked up the coffee mug again, set it down again. He seemed to be working through something that required more time than the conversation was giving him. "The shot at 8:20, he said. "The wind transition, the sheltered pocket at the tree line causes a drift in the last 300 meters, she said. The correction has to account for the re-entry to open air. Your rifle runs slightly right at extended distances. There's a trace element of cant in the stock that I've been meaning to document." Daniel stared at her. "I can fix it," she said. "It's minor. Probably only affects you past 800. You noticed a trace cant in my stock. The groupings in your long-range qualification data were consistently 2 centimeters, right at 900 and above. I went back and checked your last 3 qualification records." He was completely still. "Chief Reeves," she said. "I've been paying attention, that's all." He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. Then he said something that she did not expect. "I'm sorry," he said. She blinked. "For what?" "For 11 months. He met her eyes. "Loader, we called you Loader. It wasn't malicious." "No, it was lazy. There's a difference and the difference doesn't make it better." He exhaled slowly, carefully. She could see he was monitoring his shoulder even as he talked, the habitual self-assessment of an injured person trying to stay ahead of the pain. "I should have seen it. I should have been paying better attention to the person taking care of my weapon." The honesty in it was unexpected enough that she didn't immediately know what to do with it. "You couldn't have known," she said. "I should have been curious enough to find out." He shook his head. "Your father spent his career teaching people how to be more observant, and I missed what was right in front of me for 11 months. He'd have something to say about that. The tent was quiet for a moment. Then Megan said quietly, "He'd have said that the best camouflage is someone's assumption about who you are." Something shifted in Daniel's face. The beginning of a real smile, the kind that acknowledges something true. "Yeah," he said, "that sounds exactly like Raymond Carter." It was the first time anyone on this deployment had spoken her father's name in her presence. The weight shifted on her shoulders, not lighter, just differently distributed, the way weight feels when someone else acknowledges it's there. "Get some rest, Chief Carter." She was already turning. "The enemy shooter, the one who took me down." She turned back. "He's not in the after-action count," Daniel said. "I know," which means he was watching, not participating. Positioned to observe and execute one target. His eyes were fully sharp now, all the medication and fatigue burned away by the focus of a man who had spent his career thinking about threat. That's not an insurgent tactic. That's a professional approach. Someone was there specifically to remove the Overwatch asset. "I know," she said again. "They were watching this team before the ambush." "Yes," he looked at her. "That means they knew who I was." "A beat." "Chief," she said carefully, "how confident are you that whoever coordinated yesterday's attack had access to information about our team's personnel composition?" He was quiet for a moment. She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. "You think someone targeting this team specifically had information that included—" He stopped. Started again. "You think whoever is out there knew about you?" "I think," she said, "that the shot was very specifically designed to remove you and leave your role vacant. And I think that whoever placed that shot understood something about how this team would respond to losing its sniper." She kept her voice level. "I think the ambush was partly designed to create a situation where whoever I am would be forced to reveal it." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when something is said that cannot be unsaid. Daniel looked at her with the expression of a man who has just understood that the game he was watching was not the game he thought he was watching. "That would mean," he said slowly, "that someone out there knows Raymond Carter had a daughter who could shoot." "Yes," she said, "and wanted to find out if she could still do it." "Yes." He leaned back against his pillow. His left hand moved involuntarily toward his shoulder and then stopped conscious control over the pain response. He stared at the tent ceiling. "Who would know that?" he said. "My father had a very long career," she said. "He made friends. He also made enemies, the kind of enemies that outlast you." She adjusted the strap of her pack. "I'm going to find out who fired that shot, Chief." "That is not your assignment, Carter. My assignment changed last night." "Your assignment changed to designated marksman, not—" "The two may overlap." She looked at him directly. "Sir." Daniel Reeves, flat on a medical bed with a bullet hole in his shoulder and a face the color of old concrete, looked at his new designated marksman for a long moment. Then he said, "Be careful." "Always am, Chief. You hid for 11 months. That is not the same as being careful." She paused at the tent entrance. "No," she agreed, "it's not." She walked out into the morning, and the cold air hit her face, and somewhere beyond the wire the mountains stood indifferent and enormous, and full of everything they had not yet given up. She had been a designated marksman for less than 12 hours. She already had a mission. The intelligence debrief was at 0800, and by 0815 she understood something, that made the hair on the back of her neck rise, not with fear, exactly, but with the specific physical alertness that comes when a picture finally resolves and what it shows is worse than the blur. The attack the previous day had been coordinated across 3 separate communication channels, using encryption that required a level of sophistication well beyond what the local cell cycle was typically capable of. The intelligence officer running the debrief, a Captain Huang, compact and precise, with the measured delivery of someone who had learned to make terrible information sound manageable, put a map on the board and traced the signal points. The command and control architecture for yesterday's engagement was not local, she said. The encrypted traffic suggests external coordination. We've been running the signal patterns against known operators in the region for the past several hours. She paused. She looked at her notes. She looked at Megan. We have a partial match, she said, to a signals profile we've tracked for approximately 2 years. External actor, foreign national, former special forces background, has been operating as a coordinator and trainer for multiple cells across the eastern provinces. Our current designation for this individual is Echo 7. Torres, sitting 2 seats to Megan's left, leaned forward. Do we have an ID? Partially said. Enough to narrow the field significantly. The methodology of yesterday's strike, specifically the decision to use a precision engagement to neutralize Overwatch capability before triggering the broader ambush, is consistent with this individual's documented approach. Jake, beside Megan, kept his eyes forward, but she felt him go still in the specific way that people go still when they are listening to something and simultaneously trying to decide what it means. Megan raised her hand. Captain Huang, does the profile include any documented contact with personnel from the U.S. Special Operations Community? Huang looked at her. The look lasted 1 beat longer than a neutral look would. That's an interesting question, Specialist Carter. Designated Marksman Carter, ma'am, as of last night. A small shift in Huang's posture, the acknowledgement without the ceremony. The profile for Echo 7 includes a documented historical interaction with U.S. advisory personnel approximately 7 to 9 years ago. We don't have full detail on that interaction. Who was the advisory person? The record is incomplete, but you have a name. Huang's jaw tightened slightly. Not from hostility, from the particular discomfort of a careful person being pushed toward a disclosure they weren't certain they should make. Carter, Torres said, the warning clear in his voice. Sir, she acknowledged. Then to Huang, I have reason to believe the attack yesterday was not random and was not purely tactical. I have reason to believe this team was selected as a target because of specific personnel information, specifically information related to my family background. If Echo 7 had contact with U.S. advisory personnel 7 to 9 years ago, there is a meaningful probability that the advisory personnel in question is someone I know. The room was very quiet. Huang looked at her for a long moment. The advisory personnel name in the file, she said carefully, is listed as Carter R. The world did a small, tilted thing, not enough that anyone could see it from the outside, just enough that Megan felt it behind her sternum, the particular vertigo of information that changes the shape of everything around it. Her father had known Echo 7. Raymond Carter had interacted with the man who had coordinated yesterday's attack. The man who had put a bullet in Daniel Reeves to expose his daughter. The man who had watched the battle from the high ground and listened to her rifle speak, and then picked up his radio and said her name like it was something he had been expecting to say. She heard her own breathing for a moment, even and controlled. She had been here before, not in this situation, but in this state, the state of holding something very large very carefully so it didn't crack the container. Thank you, Captain Huang, she said. Her voice was level. It was the most controlled she had ever heard herself sound. She was terrified, not of the enemy, of what this meant, about how deep the connection went, about why her father had never told her, about what had happened between Raymond Carter and Echo 7 that had apparently set this chain of events in motion, years before Megan had ever packed her first ammunition case and boarded a plane for Afghanistan. Torres put his hand on the table between them, not touching her arm, just there, a presence. Carter, he said quietly. Yes, sir. That's a complicated piece of information.
Yes, sir.
You don't have to find, sir. She looked at him. He had the eyes of a man who was not entirely convinced, but was experienced enough to respect the answer. What's our next operational window? He studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Huang. What do we know about Echo 7's last confirmed location? And the debrief continued, and Megan took notes in the margins of her tactical map with a pen that was running low on ink, and she wrote down every detail about Echo's patterns and movements and known associates. And in the quiet part of her mind, she was already doing something else. She was remembering, 7 years ago, her father had been recalled to advisory duties for 3 months in eastern Afghanistan. She had been 21. He had come home thinner and quieter than usual, and when she asked him how it went, he had said, sometimes you try to teach the right lesson to the wrong student. She had not pushed. She was 21, and she thought she knew what that meant, and she didn't. She knew now. Her father had worked with Echo 7, had taught him maybe, had believed with the particular faith of a man who understood that skill without humanity was dangerous, and tried to pass that understanding on that whatever he was teaching would be used for something good. He had been wrong. And Viktor Malenkov, because the intelligence file had a name in it now, flagged against the signal's profile with a 73% confidence match, a name that Huang had said quietly and almost reluctantly. Like saying it made it more real, Viktor Malenkov had taken what Raymond Carter taught him and aimed it in a direction Raymond Carter had never intended. Jake found her at the armory at 1300 hours. She was performing a maintenance check on her newly issued rifle, a different system from Daniel's, assigned to her designation, which she had cleaned and checked again with the systematic focus that had always been her way of processing things that were too large to process any other way. He sat on the bench beside her, said nothing for a moment, which she appreciated. Then Huang briefed me separately, after you left. She said nothing. Your father trained Viktor Malenkov, Jake said. Not a question. Did you know? No. He was quiet. She cycled the action, set the bolt aside, inspected the chamber in the methodical way that meant she was thinking through something else entirely. Carter, Jake said, this isn't your responsibility. She looked at him. I know what you're thinking, he said. I can see it. You're thinking that because your father started this, you have to be the one to finish it. That's exactly it. He said it without anger, without judgment. Just direct, the way he always was. I've watched you for 11 months, and that's exactly what you're thinking. She set the bolt back, ran the function check, did it again. He was a student of my father's, she said. Whatever Malenkov became, part of the path that led him there ran through my family. That's not how responsibility works. I know that. But you're going to do it anyway. She assembled the rifle, checked the scope, set it down and looked at the wall. He fired a shot yesterday specifically designed to find me, she said. He knew what he was doing. He knew that removing Daniel would create a situation where whatever I was capable of would either emerge or it wouldn't. He was testing me. That's personal, Jake. That's someone who knows my name and knows my history, and is using both of them as a weapon. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then it stops being just a mission. It stopped being just a mission the moment he said my father's name into a radio. Outside the armory, the base had the sounds of afternoon operations, vehicles, voices, the distant percussion of training exercises on the range. Life continuing the way it always continued, indifferent to the specific weight any one person was carrying. Jake leaned forward, elbows on knees. He was doing the thing he did when he was working through something, head slightly down, mouth slightly open, like a person trying to hear something at a frequency just below normal hearing. I want to help, he said. Morales, I'm not asking permission. He looked at her. You've been watching out for this team for 11 months, without anyone knowing it. Let me return the favor. She looked at him, 24 years old. San Antonio, talked too much, noticed everything. Her father would have liked him. You're going to tell Torres, she said, obviously. And you're going to follow protocols. Within reason. Morales, within significant reason, he amended. She picked up her rifle, stood, checked the safety twice, once for function, once because she needed her hands to do something, while she made the decision she was already making. I need access to the intel archive on Malenkov, she said. I can get it. I need everything my father filed during his advisory rotation 7 years ago. That's going to require. I know what it requires. Jake stood too. He nodded once, the nod of a person who is committed fully to something and is done discussing whether or not to commit. Carter, he said. She slung the rifle. Be careful who you become while you're chasing this, he said. She stopped, looked at him. Your father spent his life trying to teach that lesson, he said. Don't forget it while you're trying to finish his story. For a moment, she just looked at him. This kid who talked too much and saw everything. He would have liked you, she said quietly. Jake smiled. I know, I'm very likable. She walked out of the armory and into the afternoon, and the cold light that fell from the Afghan sky like something that had traveled a very long way to get there. And she carried her rifle and the new weight, the old names, and she started moving toward the thing that was waiting. 11 months of carrying other people's ammunition had ended. She was carrying her own now. And Viktor Malenkov, somewhere in those mountains, was about to find out what happened when Raymond Carter's daughter finally stopped pretending she didn't know where all the bullets were going to go. The archive file on Viktor Malenkov was 47 pages long, and Megan read every word of it twice. She read it the first time fast, the way you read something, when you need the shape of it, the outline, the skeleton, the basic architecture of who this person was and what he had done. She read it the second time slowly, the way her father had taught her to read terrain through a scope, pausing at every detail that didn't feel right, every gap where information should have been and wasn't. Every place where the language of the report shifted in a way that suggested the person writing it had known more than they were putting down. There were a lot of those places. Viktor Malenkov, born in 1971 in a city that had changed its name twice since then. Former Special Forces, Eastern European origin, trained by a program that the Cold War had produced and the post-Cold War had abandoned like a piece of equipment left in a field to rust. Except Viktor Malenkov had not rusted, he had adapted. He had moved through the decade after his program dissolved with the particular resourcefulness of a man who had been built for a world that no longer existed and had decided to build a new one around himself instead. He appeared in intelligence files for the first time in 2003, training fighters in a region that Megan's file identified only as classified location, Eastern Theater. He appeared again in 2006 in a different region. Different fighters, same methodology, precision, patience, the kind of long-term tactical thinking that produced results years down the line rather than weeks. He was not a man who thought in terms of immediate victories. He was a man who planted things and waited for them to grow. And then there was the gap. 18 months, 2007, late 2008, where Viktor Malenkov did not appear in any intelligence file anywhere. No confirmed sightings, no signal intercepts, no reports from assets in the field. 18 months where a man who had been consistently visible simply stopped being visible. The gap ended in late 2008. After it ended, his methodology changed. Before the gap, training, coordination, the work of a man building other people's capabilities. After the gap, something quieter, more targeted. The attacks he was connected to after 2008 were not mass casualty events. They were precision strikes, single target eliminations. The removal of specific individuals at specific moments designed to create specific effects. The gap was the dividing line between Viktor Malenkov as a trainer and Viktor Malenkov as something considerably more dangerous. The advisory record that Huang had referenced Raymond Carter's interaction with Malenkov fell exactly in the middle of the gap. 2007 to 2008, Her father had spent 3 months in eastern Afghanistan in the second half of 2007. He had come home thinner and quieter. He had said, "Sometimes you try to teach the right lesson to the wrong student." The record itself was sparse, 4 pages heavily redacted, with black bars that covered whole paragraphs in places. What remained was enough to establish that Raymond Carter had been brought in to work with a cooperative asset that was the language. Cooperative asset whose background suggested potential for a different kind of work. The nature of that work was redacted. The reason the cooperation ended was redacted. The final assessment of the asset was partially redacted, but one phrase survived the black bar: demonstrate exceptional capacity for precision engagement. Will not accept ethical framework governing use. He will not accept the framework. Megan read that phrase and heard her father's voice saying it. Not to her, to someone else, to the debriefers who had asked him how it went, and he had told them in the careful language of official reporting what he had told her in the simpler language of a tired man on a porch. Sometimes you try to teach the right lesson to the wrong student. She closed the file. Sat for a moment in the quiet of the intelligence room, which at 2200 hours was empty except for her, and the hum of computers and the particular quality of silence, that rooms full of information have a weighted silence, the silence of things known and things half known and things carefully not known pressing against each other. Her father had looked at Viktor Malenkov and seen potential, had tried to give him the framework, had believed, because Raymond Carter believed this with the stubborn, patient faith of a man who had built his entire life around it, that the ability to cause harm was only truly dangerous when it was not paired with the understanding of why you shouldn't. Malenkov had taken the ability, he had left the framework on the table. And now here was Raymond Carter's daughter, 11 years later, sitting in a forward operating base in the same mountains where her father had made the mistake of believing in a man who had chosen to be something else. She thought he did not make a mistake. He made a choice. The right choice, the principled choice, the choice that defined who Raymond Carter was. The fact that it didn't work the way he hoped, that wasn't a failure of his values. It was a failure of Malenkov's. She thought that. She believed it. She was also furious, not at her father, at the situation. At the years of clean, careful, principled choices her father had made, the weight he had carried, the framework he had tried to pass on, and the fact that it had not been enough to stop this. That his death had not been the end of it. That his legacy had followed her here. She was also underneath the fury afraid, not of Malenkov. She had been afraid before and she knew what to do with it. She was afraid of the thing Jake had said in the armory: be careful who you become while you're chasing this. She was afraid of the moment, and she could feel it out there, somewhere ahead, the way you feel weather coming when the chase would stop being about justice and start being about something else. Her father had told her about that moment too. The hardest shot you'll ever take, Raymond Carter had said, sitting on that porch in Maryland, is the one where you have every reason to and one reason not to. And the reason not to is the only one that matters. She had been 19. She had rolled her eyes. She was 28 now in Afghanistan, with a rifle and a target and a connection she hadn't asked for and couldn't put down. She understood. At 0600 the next morning, Torres called a team meeting that everyone knew was really about one thing. Intel has developed the Malenkov lead further overnight, he said. He looked around the table at the assembled operators, and then without particular ceremony, at Megan. Carter, brief us. She had spent the 3 hours between the intelligence room and this meeting putting together what she knew in the order that made the most tactical sense, and she delivered it the way her father had taught her to deliver information that mattered, without decoration, without padding, with the confidence of someone who had verified everything they were saying. She told them about the gap, about the methodology change, about the advisory record and what it meant for Malenkov's understanding of American precision shooting doctrine, about the signals profile and the 73% confidence match. She did not tell them about her father, not the personal part, not the porch in Maryland. not sometimes you try to teach the right lesson to the wrong student. That was hers. It wasn't relevant to the tactical picture. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Torres looked at her, then at the table, then back at her. "You put this together overnight," he said. "Yes, sir." "When did you sleep?" "I'll sleep later, sir." Something moved across his face that was close to what she had seen in Daniel's face in the medical tent, the expression of a man recalibrating in real time. "Malenkov's last confirmed position," he said. "How old is that intelligence?" 72 hours, he's moving. But his pattern suggests he maintains a fixed operating base in a specific area. The signal intercepts triangulate to a range of approximately 20 kilometers northeast of yesterday's engagement site. 20 kilometers northeast, Jake said. He was looking at the map. "That's the upper Korangal drainage. Yes, that's rough country." "Yes, he chose it specifically," Megan said. "High ground, limited approach routes, good observation in multiple directions. He set up there because he could see us before we could see him." Torres drummed his fingers on the table once. "Stop." "What's he waiting for?" The question landed in the room and sat there. Megan looked at Torres. She took a breath that she kept deliberately even and said, "I think he's waiting for us to come to him." "Why would he want that?" "Because he set this up," she said. "The ambush wasn't the objective. The ambush was the mechanism. He wanted to know if I was here, and if I could do what he remembered my father's family could do. Now he knows." She paused. "He's been operating for years with a specific understanding of American doctrine based on what my father taught him. He knows how we think. He knows how we plan. He wants to use that against us." Torres looked at her for a long moment. Then, "And you want to go get him?" "I want to close this, sir." "Carty's going to keep operating. He's trained dozens of fighters across this region in the last 5 years. Every day he's active is another day that training gets used against American personnel." She held Torres's gaze. "And he made it personal. Not just to me, he used your team as a mechanism. He put a bullet in your chief. That's not something you leave on the table." Torres said nothing. The room said nothing. Jake, from the far end of the table, said quietly, "She's right, sir." Torres looked at Jake, then at Megan, then at the map on the wall with the red circle 20 kilometers northeast of yesterday's disaster. "I need authorization," he said. "I know, sir. And I need a plan that doesn't get people killed." "I have one," she said, "or the beginning of one." He looked at her for one more long moment. "Brief me in an hour," he said. "Full detail." She nodded. She started to gather her materials. "Carter." His voice stopped her. "Daniel wants to be in the planning loop. He's not cleared to be in the field yet, and he knows it. But he asked to be consulted." She thought of Daniel in the medical tent, asking about wind corrections from a hospital bed. She thought of him saying, "I've been using your father's technique for 8 years. "I'll brief him separately," she said. "First." Torres nodded. She went to the medical tent. Daniel was more awake than the previous morning, still pale, still in pain, still managing both with the particular discipline of a man who had long ago decided that physical difficulty was information rather than obstacle. He had a notepad on his knee and a pen in his right hand, and he was writing something that he stopped writing when she entered. "Close the flap," he said. She did. She sat. She told him everything. Not the truncated tactical version she would give Torres. The advisory record, the gap, the phrase "will not accept ethical framework governing use." Her father's voice on the porch in Maryland, the fury she was managing. The fear underneath it, she didn't plan to tell him all of it. It came out anyway, in the particular way that things come out when you are in the presence of someone who knew the person you're grieving. Because Daniel Reeves had known her father's work for 8 years, and that was closer than almost anyone. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Outside the tent, the base continued with its morning routine: generators, vehicles, voices. The world being very normal around the edges of something that wasn't. "Your father would not want you going into that valley angry," Daniel said. "Not because anger is wrong, because angry is inaccurate. And inaccurate gets people killed. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "How are you managing it?" The anger, yes. She thought about it honestly. I'm keeping it to one side, acknowledging it's there, not letting it make decisions. He considered that, nodded slowly. Raymond taught me that too. Different words, same idea. He tapped the notepad. He used to say the rifle doesn't care how you feel. The wind doesn't care. The distance doesn't care. The only thing that matters in the moment of the shot is whether you're aligned with the truth of the situation. She had heard those words before. Slightly different phrasing, same architecture. He taught you that? She said. Taught the man who taught me. Who used it so often it became doctrine. He paused. Your father built something that is still being used to keep people alive. Remember that. Whatever Malenkov took from the same source, that doesn't change what Raymond Carter built. She looked at the tent floor for a moment. The plan, she said, bringing herself back. Tell me, she laid it out. The 20-kilometer approach northeast. The limited access routes and how that could be used rather than fought against. The signal pattern and what it suggested about Malenkov's routine. The possibility not certain, but real, that he would be expecting them to come in strength, fast, and loud, because that was American doctrine, and they should therefore come in the opposite of strength, fast, and loud. Small team, Daniel said. Minimal footprint. 2 operators, 1 support me. Move at night slow. Torres won't like the small size. Torres won't like any of it. I'll make the case. She looked at Daniel. I need you to make the parallel case from the medical team. He raised an eyebrow. You want me to advocate for an operation that I cannot participate in? I want you to tell Torres that the tactical logic is sound. He'll listen to you. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then something settled in his expression, a decision made and made cleanly. The logic is sound, he said. Small team, quiet approach, patience over speed. That's Raymond Carter's doctrine applied against someone Raymond Carter trained. The irony is not lost on me, so you'll talk to Torres. I'll talk to Torres. He picked up his pen. Set it down. Carter, what happens when you find him? She had been waiting for the question. She had been asking it to herself all night. I take him into custody if I can, she said. And if you can't, I do what I need to do. That's not a specific enough answer. I know. He looked at her with the full weight of 8 years of practicing her father's doctrine. The hardest decision is knowing when not to, she said. My father told me, and what he told you, do you believe it? Not as a lesson, as something you actually believe. The question sat in the air between them, and she could feel the honesty it required, the real answer rather than the correct sounding answer. I'm working on it, she said. He held her gaze. That, he said, is the most honest thing you've said in 2 days. The authorization came through at 1400. It came through faster than anyone expected, which Torres noted with the particular suspicion of an experienced operator who understood that easy approvals in difficult situations usually meant someone above him wanted something beyond the stated objective. He called Megan into his office, a generous word for the space, which was a sectioned-off corner of the operations building, with a folding table and a whiteboard and a persistent smell of coffee that had given up trying to be good. Authorization granted, he said. 4-person element. You, Morales, Stevens, and Reed, 72-hour window. She nodded. Understood, sir. I want to be clear about something. He leaned forward. This is a capture or kill authorization. Command wants him alive if possible because of what he knows. His intelligence value is significant, but they are not naive about the operational context. Understood. Carter. His voice shifted to something below the command register, something closer to the voice he had used when he said, Are you okay in the debrief room? You are the best qualified person for this operation. Your skill set, your knowledge of the background, your specific circumstance makes you more effective here than anyone else I could send. He paused. It also makes you more vulnerable to making decisions for the wrong reasons. She met his eyes. I know, sir. Tell me what the wrong reasons look like for you specifically. It was the kind of question that less careful leaders didn't ask because the answer was uncomfortable. Torres asked it because he was the kind of leader who would rather be uncomfortable with truth than comfortable with a lie. She took a breath. Revenge for my father. The feeling that this is personal instead of professional. The impulse to make Malenkov understand what he did, rather than simply stopping him from doing it again. Torres studied her face. And right now, in this moment, which is it? She held his gaze. Right now it's professional, she said. I can't promise you it stays that way when I'm looking at him through a scope. The honesty seemed to satisfy something in him, not because it reassured him, but because it was honest. That's why Morales goes with you, he said. He'll watch the human variables. You watch the tactical ones. She almost said Jake isn't qualified for that kind of oversight and stopped herself because she knew it wasn't true. Jake Morales was exactly qualified. He had been reading people and situations accurately since the day she met him. The fact that he was 24 and from San Antonio and talked too much did not change what he was. Yes, sir, she said. The team staged at 2200. Jake appeared beside her at the equipment check with the particular focused energy of someone who had been waiting for a long time to be useful in a specific way. He ran his own check without being told to, the systematic efficiency of a good operator, and then he ran hers, not because he doubted her, but because that was what you did when you were part of a team that took care of each other. How are you doing, he said. You asked me that last night. I'm asking again. She secured a piece of equipment. Checked the connection, moved to the next. I told Torres the truth about the wrong reasons, she said. He approved the operation anyway. Because you told him the truth, Jake said. A person who's actually compromised doesn't have that kind of self-awareness. That's generous, it's accurate. He paused. Your father taught you something very specific. He taught you to think about the shot before you take it. That's exactly what you're doing right now. She stopped, looked at him. You're always thinking about the shot, he said. Not just the physical shot, the whole shot, what it means. What happens after. That's not a liability. That's the only reason I trust you in that valley. Stevens and Reed appeared on the other side of the equipment staging area. Stevens was 31, compact and economical in his movements, the kind of operator who communicated primarily through efficiency. Reed was 38, older than the rest of them, with the patient eyes of a man who had been in enough difficult situations to stop being surprised by them. Neither of them had said anything explicit to Megan since the reassignment. But the way they worked around her had changed the subtle recalibration of people who have updated their assessment and are adjusting their behavior to match. It wasn't warmth exactly, it was respect, which she valued more. Reed caught her eye across the equipment, nodded once. The nod of a person who had decided something and was confirming it without drama. She nodded back. At 2300, they moved out. The mountains at night were a different country from the mountains in daylight. The cold was deeper, the dark more absolute, the sounds when there were sounds carrying in ways that the daytime wind covered. They moved in the silence that good operators move in, not the silence of absence, but the silence of four people who had learned to make themselves part of the environment rather than things passing through it. Megan moved second in the file behind Stevens, the rifle on her back familiar enough now that she had stopped noticing its weight as a separate thing. It had become part of her weight. She was carrying it rather than it riding her, which was the distinction her father had drawn when she was a teenager learning to move with a long gun. She thought about her father in the way that you think about people when you are doing the thing they prepared you to do. Not with grief exactly, though the grief was there, folded underneath everything else. With something more like presence, the feeling of being accompanied. Raymond Carter was 12 years dead, and she was walking toward the man who had chosen to take everything Raymond Carter taught and point it at the world in the wrong direction. And she was thinking about the porch in Maryland and the cold July beer he'd been drinking and the specific angle of his face when he said the hardest decision is knowing when not to. She was going to need that lesson. She was going to need it more than she had ever needed any other lesson her father had given her. At 0200, they stopped for a mandatory rest at the first waypoint. Stevens marked their position. Reed took the first watch. Jake settled beside Megan in the way he had, close enough to talk quietly, far enough not to crowd. 20 kilometers is a long way to think, he said. I've been thinking, is that a problem? No, just means I know better than to interrupt it without cause. She appreciated that. She looked at the dark around them, not describing it to herself, just being in it. Her father had taught her that too. You spend so much time trying to process information from your environment that sometimes you forget to just be in it. The dark is information. The cold is information. Everything is information if you pay the right kind of attention. Jake, she said quietly, yeah, if I make the wrong call out there, I'll stop you. You might not be in a position to. Then I'll call it after. Make sure the record is accurate. He paused. Not because I think you'll get it wrong. Because you're asking me to be a check and I take that seriously. She looked at him in the dark, the outline of him, the steadiness of him. My father would have liked you, she said again. Second time she'd said it in 2 days. I know, Jake said. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. He was quiet for a moment. Then my dad was like Raymond Carter. Different field, he was a doctor, not a soldier, but the same kind of man. The kind who makes it his life's work to pass something important on, and then worries that it didn't take. He paused. It took with you. I can see it in everything you do. The way you maintain that equipment, the way you shoot, the way you're thinking about this operation right now. He looked at her. It took, she said nothing. The dark around them continued being dark. After a moment, she said, he knew my father. He knew Malenkov wasn't going to take the framework. He came home and he knew he'd failed with that specific student. But he never told me, she paused. He had the chance. Multiple chances. He never told me there was someone out there who knew the Carter name and had chosen to use it against everything we stood for. Why do you think he didn't? She had thought about this all night. Because he didn't want me to see it as his failure. He carried it as his. He didn't want to pass that part on. She exhaled slowly. He was protecting me from it. Jake was quiet. That's the thing about someone who spends their life protecting people, she said. They don't always know when to stop. He sounds like he was a remarkable person. He was. He was also human. He made the mistake of believing the best version of someone who had decided to be the worst version. She paused. I'm not sure that's a mistake. I think it's just what happens when a truly good person encounters someone who has chosen not to be. At 0400, they moved again. At 0600, as the sky was beginning to define itself from the dark in the gradual way it does in the mountains, not a sunrise so much as a slow revelation, Reed stopped the column with a hand signal. He turned back. His eyes found Megan's. He pointed. Northeast, 2 kilometers. The faint, specific quality of disturbed air that in the mountains indicates human presence, a fire recently extinguished, body heat, the particular way sound travels when people have been somewhere and have gone. Not gone far. Malenkov's operating base. They were 2 kilometers from the man her father had tried to teach and failed to reach. And the thing Megan felt in that moment, the thing that surprised her, that she had not expected and could not have prepared for, was not anger. Not fear, not the specific gravity of years of wait arriving at their destination. It was clarity, the same clarity she had felt looking through the scope in the valley during the ambush. The world going sharp and still and true, every variable present, every calculation available. The particular quality of readiness that her father had spent years trying to teach her and that she had spent 6 years trying to give away. It was still there. It had always been there. She looked at Jake. He looked back at her. Whatever he saw in her face made him nod once certain. She looked at Stevens and Reed. Same nod reflected back. She checked her rifle, slow, quiet, complete, every function, every setting. The kind of check you do when you know it matters and you refuse to cut corners because you are afraid of what comes next. Her hands were steady, her father's voice in her head. The rifle doesn't care how you feel. The wind doesn't care. The distance doesn't care. The only thing that matters is whether you're aligned with the truth of the situation. She was aligned. She gestured forward. They moved. They moved through the last 2 kilometers in 40 minutes. 40 minutes of the particular silence that 4 people make when they are each individually managing the weight of what they are about to do, and the silence has a texture to it, not empty, not peaceful, but dense. The silence of compressed attention and controlled breathing, and the specific discipline of people who have trained themselves to keep their fear in a manageable location so it doesn't interfere with their function. Megan moved behind Stevens ahead of Jake, the rifle adjusted on her back to clear the terrain without sounding against anything that would give them away. Her breathing was even. Her steps were placed with the deliberate lightness of someone who had learned young that the ground tells things to people who are paying attention, and she was paying every kind of attention available to her. Reed had the point. He stopped the column twice in those 40 minutes, once for sound, once for a tripwire that someone had placed with professional competence along the most logical approach route, which told Megan something important. Malenkov had prepared this position against exactly the kind of approach they were using. He had anticipated them coming from the south. He had placed his countermeasures accordingly. He expected them. The question was whether he expected them to be this few. At 0640, they reached the position Reed had identified. The forward edge of Malenkov's operating area, the perimeter of a space that had been occupied for long enough to acquire the particular character of a place someone actually lived, rather than a place someone was passing through. Megan could feel it rather than see it. The organization of the space, the deliberateness of the choices, the selection of positions that gave observation in multiple directions simultaneously. This was not a hastily assembled camp. This was the fixed operating base of a man who had spent years building the specific kind of knowledge that lets you choose terrain the way a chess player chooses position, not for what it gives you now, but for what it prevents them from doing later. Her father would have respected the position selection. That made her cold in a way that the mountain air hadn't. Stevens crouched beside her and passed a signal. 2 guards. 1 north, 1 east. Rotating positions, 7-minute interval. The interior of the camp held at least 3 additional people, 2 she could confirm, 1 possible. She held up 4 fingers. Question, where is the 4th? Stevens shook his head, not confirmed. Jake leaned close enough to speak against her ear without making sound that carried. He knows we're here, he said. Not a question. She looked at him. Why do you say that? Too quiet. The guards are too calm. A camp that size, morning activity there should be more movement. This feels like people who were told to look relaxed. She processed that. He was right. The specific quality of the quiet was wrong, not natural quiet, but performed quiet. The quiet of people who have been instructed to hold positions and not reveal awareness. Malenkov had laid a counter-ambush inside their ambush. She felt the shift happen in her chest, not panic, nothing close to panic, but the rapid recalibration of a mind that has just understood that the situation is different from what it appeared. The math changed, the variables changed. The plan they had built over 48 hours of careful work had just run into the single most dangerous thing any plan can run into, which is a patient, intelligent enemy who has been 1 step ahead the whole time. She pulled the team back 20 meters, gathered them. He knows we're here, she said quietly, flat and certain. The camp is staged. Reed's jaw tightened. How long has he known? Long enough to set the positions. Could be hours. Could be since we left the FOB. We have a leak? Stevens said, and the way he said it had the compressed anger of a man who does not like that word. I don't know. Could be signals intercept. Could be observation. He's been running assets in this region for years. She paused. It doesn't change what we do next. It changes how. Jake was looking at her. His expression was the one she had learned to read over the past days, the expression that meant he was already 3 steps into the same problem and had found something she might not have found yet. He didn't run, Jake said. No, he set up to receive us. Which means, he wants the meeting, she said. The 4 of them looked at each other. Viktor Malenkov, former Special Forces, trainer of fighters, precision operator, student of Raymond Carter who had left the framework on the table, had known they were coming and had chosen not to disappear into the mountains where finding him might have taken months. He had waited because he wanted something from this encounter that a disappearing act couldn't give him. Pull back to the secondary, Megan said. Full perimeter. Nobody moves until I figure out what he actually wants. They pulled back, established the position. Reed and Stevens took the outer perimeter with the efficiency of operators who had done this kind of reorganization in worse circumstances. Jake stayed with Megan. She lay flat, the rifle in front of her, scanning the camp through the scope with the methodical patience of someone reading a document carefully rather than quickly. Every position, every person she could observe, every detail of a camp that was telling her things about the man who built it if she was willing to listen. And then she saw something. At 07:15, a man emerged from the central structure of the camp and stood in the open. Not moving, not taking cover. Standing in the open with his hands visible in a posture that was unmistakably deliberate, the posture of a man who wanted to be seen and wanted it known that he wanted to be seen. He was taller than she expected, broad through the shoulders. Silver-haired, which surprised her, though it shouldn't have. He was in his mid-50s, the age her father had been when she was a teenager. He stood with the particular quality of stillness that she recognized immediately because she had learned to recognize it in herself, that stillness being the posture of a long-range shooter at rest, someone whose body had learned that economy of movement was not a choice but an orientation. He was looking in her direction. Not at her, she was invisible, she was certain of that. But in her direction, at the distance where he had calculated she would be. He was right. And then he did something that stopped her breathing for a full second. He raised his right hand and held it open, palm outward, fingers together. The hand signal for I am not hostile, not an insurgent signal. Not a regional gesture. An American military signal, precise and unambiguous, from the doctrine of a country that was not his. Raymond Carter's doctrine. Her father had taught him that signal. She heard her own heartbeat in her ears once, twice. Jake, beside her, said very quietly, "He's trying to talk to you." "I see it, Carter, I see it, Jake." She kept the scope on him. Kept her breathing even. Ran the calculation that had nothing to do with wind or distance or bullet trajectory, the calculation that her father had been trying to get her to run her whole life, the one that asked, what is this situation actually requiring of me right now? He could be drawing you out, Stevens said through the earpiece. Yes, it's a trap, it might be. It might also be exactly what it looks like. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, Reed said. No, she agreed, they're not. She kept watching Malenkov stand in the open, with his hands visible and his posture deliberate and his face turned toward the place where he knew she was, and she thought about everything she knew about him, the file, the gap, the methodology change, the phrase will not accept ethical framework governing use, and she thought about the ambush, the shot that took Daniel down, the radio transmission, tell the woman who carries the bullets I remember her father. He remembered her father, not as an enemy, as something more complicated than an enemy. She made a decision. Jake, she said, yeah, I'm going to make contact. Silence on the line. Then Torres's voice, because Torres had been listening from the faux B on the secure channel, and Torres was the kind of commander who listened. Carter. Clarify your intent. He's not running, sir. He's waited for us, and he's standing in the open. He's using American military signals to indicate non-hostility. I believe he wants a direct communication. That is a significant risk. Yes, sir. But the alternative is an engagement against a prepared position against an operator who knows we're here. Our casualty probability goes up substantially if we try to take this by force when he's ready for it. A pause. She knew what Torres was doing, the rapid calculation of mission objectives against operational risk, the weighing of what command wanted against what the situation was actually offering. You have discretion, Torres said, but Carter, you keep eyes on you at all times. Morales does not lose visual, ever, understood, sir. She looked at Jake. He was already repositioning to a spot that gave him maximum observation of the open ground between the tree line and the camp. His rifle was up. His posture had the total, unambiguous commitment of a person who has been given one job and intends to do it perfectly. "I've got you," he said. She stood up. She slung her rifle, kept it accessible, did not put it away, but moved it from the shooting position to the carried position, the position that said, "I am not currently trying to kill you, but I am not naive either." She walked into the open. The distance between her position and Malenkov was approximately 80 meters of open ground. She walked it at a measured pace, not slow enough to look uncertain, not fast enough to look aggressive. The pace of someone who has made a decision and is following through on it. Malenkov watched her come. He did not move. He did not reach for anything. He kept his hands exactly where they had been, visible and still, and as she got closer, she could see his face more clearly, and what she saw there was not what she had expected. She had expected coldness, the professional neutrality of an operator who had decided that what they were doing was simply a function, simply a skill applied to a direction, nothing more. What she saw instead was something older than that. Something that looked almost against her will like recognition. Like a man looking at a face he has been expecting to see for a long time and feeling the complicated weight of that expectation finally arriving. She stopped at 8 meters. They looked at each other. The mountains around them were enormous and indifferent, and the morning light was arriving in pieces between the peaks, and for a moment the entire situation seemed to hold its breath. Then Viktor Malenkov said in English that was heavily accented and completely clear, "You have his eyes." She said nothing. "Raymond Carter, you have his eyes. The way they move, the way they check." He tilted his head slightly. "He told me he had a daughter who could shoot." "I know," she said. He was proud, not competitive proud, the other kind. The kind that is quiet. Her hands were steady. She was grateful for that. "You shot Daniel Reeves," she said, "my team's chief." "Yes." Why? He looked at her for a moment with those eyes that were not what she expected. "Because I needed to know if you were here, and I needed you to come out." He paused. "He is alive?" "Yes." Something in his face, a small release. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The response of a man who had made a calculated decision and is reconciling the calculation with its human consequences. "Good," he said. "That was important to me, to not kill him." "You put a bullet in his shoulder." "A very precise shoulder," he said. "In a location I spent 3 hours calculating to ensure survivability. He will recover fully." The precision of that, the specificity of the cruelty, and the cruelty of the specificity made her stomach turn. "You spent 3 hours calculating how to wound him without killing him," she said. "Yes, so that I would come."
Yes.
She looked at him. Why did you need me to come? You've been operating in this region for years. You could have kept operating. You could have disappeared when you saw us coming this morning. But you didn't. No." Why? He looked at her for a long moment. The mountains were doing their morning thing, the light changing, the air moving, the particular quality of altitude that makes everything feel slightly more real than it does at lower elevations. Or possibly slightly less. She had never been able to decide which. "Because your father was the only man who ever showed me that it was possible to be what I am and still have a framework," he said. "And I chose not to take the framework. And I have been making choices for 17 years that I would not have made if I had taken it." He paused. "I wanted to see what the framework produces, when it is passed on to someone who accepts it." She stared at him. "You engineered an ambush that wounded 4 people and nearly got my team killed," she said, "because you wanted to see if my father's lessons took?" "That is a simplified version. That is the accurate version." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said, "it is." The fury that she had been managing in a separate location for 2 days moved. She felt it move, a physical thing, a shift in the chest, a heat that climbed toward the part of her brain that was responsible for decisions. She felt it, and she did not let it reach that part of her brain. She held it at the threshold, and she breathed, the breath pattern her father had taught her, the one that meant she was present and ready and not being governed by anything other than her own intention. Her hands were steady, the rifle was on her back. "Victor," she said, and using his name surprised both of them slightly. The intimacy of it, the directness. What do you actually want from this conversation? He was quiet for a moment. The quietness of a man choosing words with the same care he would use to choose a firing position, because both were matters of precision and consequence. 17 years ago, he said, I was in a room with your father for 3 months. He tried to give me something. I understood what he was offering. I did not believe I needed it. I believed power was sufficient, skill was sufficient, that the ability to do a thing was all the justification required for doing it. He paused. I was wrong, and now you're telling me this. Now I am telling you this. Why now? Why like this? Why not find a different way? Turn yourself in through a channel. Make contact through intelligence services. Because I needed to know, he said again, that it was real. That Raymond Carter's framework was not just words. I needed to see someone living it in conditions that make it difficult to live. He looked at her directly without evasion. I engineered a situation that would force you to use your ability. And then I watched what you did with it, the choices you made in that valley. He paused. You could have killed more. The targets were there. You chose the minimum. You chose precisely enough and stopped. She thought about the 12-minute engagement, the choices she had made in real time. The fighters she could have engaged and hadn't, because they were no longer the direct threat. He had been watching all of it. You were on the high ground, she said. Yes. From the beginning. Yes. I had observation of the entire engagement from before the ambush began. The chill that went through her was not temperature. You watched it all, she said. You engineered the whole thing. The ambush, the timing, Daniel's wound, all of it was designed to create a specific situation. Yes, to test whether Raymond Carter's daughter had his values. She looked at him for a long, long moment. People could have died, she said. People were wounded. You used my team, real people, with families, with lives, as a mechanism for your crisis of conscience. The words came out level. She had not planned them. They were simply the truth of what she felt, arriving in the correct sequence. Malenkov did not flinch from them. He absorbed them the way she had learned to absorb difficult information fully, without deflecting. Yes, he said, that is accurate, and I cannot make it otherwise by any explanation I offer. The morning light was fully up now. Around them, the camp had the quality of something held in suspension, the guards at their positions, Stevens and Reed at the perimeter, Jake somewhere behind her with eyes that she trusted more than she had ever trusted any pair of eyes in the field. She made a choice. You have information, she said, about cell networks, training pipelines, operations currently in planning. He looked at her. Yes, you're going to give it to us. A pause. Yes, all of it. Everything you know, every name, every location, every operation you have knowledge of. Yes, and you are going to surrender, formally, to this team, to be transferred to you. Custody for formal processing. He held her gaze for a long moment. Yes, he said. She reached for her radio. Torres. Monitoring, Torres said immediately. Request intelligence asset processing team at my location. I have a voluntary surrender. High-value target, full cooperation indicated. Request secure transport. A pause that lasted long enough for Torres to be genuinely surprised, which was not a state she had seen him in often. Say again, Carter. Victor Malenkov is surrendering voluntarily, sir. He is offering full cooperation with intelligence processing. I need a team here. Silence then. Copy that. Stand by. She lowered the radio, looked at Malenkov. He was watching her with the expression Tisha had noted and been unable to categorize at first, the expression that was older than cold professionalism and more complicated than simple recognition. She could categorize it now. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just set it down and is experiencing the particular physical sensation of weight released, not lightness, exactly because the muscles are still remembering the weight, but the beginning of the possibility of lightness, somewhere in the future, if the person is very careful and very honest with themselves going forward. She knew that expression intimately. She had seen it on her own face in the 11 months of carrying ammunition that was not hers, in the 6 years of keeping a skill at arm's length, because the weight that came with it was too real and too large, and she had not been ready. She knew exactly what it felt like to put something down. Your father told me something once, Malenkov said. She waited. He said a man who knows how to cause harm and chooses not to is more powerful than a man who causes harm because he can. I argued with him. I said restraint was weakness. He paused. I argued with him for 3 months. He never got angry. He just kept showing me examples of people who had chosen restraint and what that choice had built. He looked at her. You standing here right now with the right to shoot me and choosing not to you are his best argument. She felt something move in her chest, not grief, not anger. Something quieter and older and harder to name. He died believing he'd failed with you, she said. Malenkov closed his eyes briefly. Opened them, I know. He came home and he never told me about you because he was protecting me from his failure. But he died believing it, I know. His voice was steady and entirely without defense. I cannot change that. I have understood for many years that I cannot change that. He looked at her directly. But I can do what I am doing now, which is not enough, and I know it is not enough, and I am doing it anyway. Jake appeared at her left shoulder. She had not heard him approach, which told her he had moved from his observation position to close proximity with the particular skill of a person who knows how to be where they're needed, exactly when they're needed. He looked at Malenkov. Everything okay? He said. Yes, she said. He's surrendering? He is. Jake looked at Malenkov for a moment. The particular looking of a person who is evaluating something very carefully. You used real people to prove a philosophical point, Jake said. His voice was not angry. It was the voice of someone naming a thing accurately. You need to understand that before you're processed. The people you put in harm's way, that cost is real. The intelligence you provide doesn't erase that. Malenkov looked at Jake with what appeared to be genuine attention. You are not her, he said. No, Jake agreed, but you are saying what she is also thinking. I'm saying it out loud because sometimes things need to be said out loud. Malenkov looked at him for a moment more. Then he nodded. The nod of someone accepting a correction they have earned. The processing team arrived at 10:47. 6 people. 2 intelligence officers, 4 security. They came from the south, fast and professional, and they assessed the situation with the rapid efficiency of people who had been trained for exactly this kind of scenario and were slightly surprised to find it unfolding in the relatively orderly fashion it was. The senior intelligence officer, a Major Calloway, spoke briefly with Megan at the perimeter while the security team managed Malenkov's formal surrender. He came out voluntarily, Calloway said. Yes, ma'am. What was his stated reason? Megan considered how to summarize it. The 3 months in a room with her father. The framework he refused. 17 years of choices made in the absence of what Raymond Carter had tried to give him. The ambush engineered not for tactical gain, but for the answer to a question that had been asking itself inside him for longer than she had been deployed. He said he needed to see if the lesson took, she said. Calloway looked at her. What lesson? That doing this kind of work with restraint, with the right framework, produces something more powerful than doing it without. She paused. He needed evidence. He engineered a situation to get it. Calloway absorbed that. She looked over at Malenkov, who was being processed with the quiet compliance of someone who has already made a decision and is now simply living inside it. That's the most unusual thing I've heard in this job, she said. Yes, ma'am. Did the lesson take? Megan looked at Malenkov across the distance, at the man who had known her father, who had carried his own weight in the wrong direction for 17 years, who had, in the most convoluted and costly and imperfect way imaginable, arrived at the point of setting it down. She thought about standing up from behind the rifle scope and walking 80 meters in the open. She thought about the fury she had managed, and the decision she had made, and the steadiness of her hands at every moment. She thought about her father. I think she said that some lessons take a very long time, and some of them take in ways the teacher never gets to see. She paused. But they take. At 1200 hours, Malenkov was in secure transport heading south. Megan, Jake, Stevens, and Reed stood at the edge of the position and watched the vehicles disappear. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Reed, who was 38 and had the patient eyes of a man who had stopped being surprised by things, said, "Well, that was not how I expected this morning to go." Stevens made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement and contained elements of both. Jake looked at Megan. "How are you doing?" he asked. Third time he had asked that in 3 days. She thought about it honestly. The same way she had been trying to do everything honestly for the past 72 hours, because dishonesty with yourself in this kind of situation was not a luxury you could afford. "I'm not finished yet," she said. He looked at her. "There's one more thing I need to do," she said, "before this is over." He waited. "I need to go home," she said, "when this deployment ends." "I need to go to Maryland," she paused. "I need to tell my father's grave what happened." Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with the absolute simplicity of someone who understands completely, "Yeah, you do." The mountains around them were enormous and old and completely indifferent, the way mountains are. They had seen everything. They would see everything again. They did not keep score. But Megan Carter kept score. Not the official score, not the after-action count, not the intelligence value extracted, not the operational metrics that Calloway's team would use to measure the success of the morning. The score that mattered, the one that had to do with who she had been when this started and who she was now and what the distance between those two things had cost and produced. The distance was real. The cost was real. And somewhere in the accounting of it in the 12 minutes in the valley and the 48 hours of intelligence work and the 80 meters of open ground she had walked toward a man holding his hands visible, but in all of it was her father's voice, patient and steady, and so familiar that it still lived in her chest like a second heartbeat. The hardest decision is not knowing how to shoot. It is knowing when not to. She had taken the shot when it needed to be taken. She had not taken it when it didn't. She was her father's daughter. She had always been her father's daughter. She just finally understood what that meant. The transport back to the forward operating base took 3 hours. 3 hours of road and mountain. And the particular exhaustion that follows an operation that went differently from every version you had planned for it. Not badly differently. The kind of different that leaves you with more questions than you started with. And the questions are not tactical questions. They are the larger kind, the ones that have to do with what people are and what they choose to become, and whether those two things are ever fully separable. Megan sat in the back of the vehicle with her rifle between her knees and her eyes open, and her mind doing the thing it did when the immediate pressure released it, went looking for all the things she had set aside to deal with later. Later had arrived. The things were waiting. Jake sat across from her. He had fallen asleep within 20 minutes of the vehicle moving, the specific unconsciousness of a young operator whose body understood the relationship between exertion and recovery better than his mind did. He slept with his head against the vehicle wall and his hands loose in his lap, and he looked, in that unguarded moment, exactly as young as he was. She watched him sleep and thought about what he had said over the past 3 days. All of it. The furniture in the dark room. Be careful who you become. Part of you knew it took 24 years old from San Antonio, talked too much, noticed everything. Raymond Carter would have genuinely liked him. Stevens drove. Reed had the radio. The mountains moved past the windows in the way mountains move when you are inside something moving through them, not as scenery but as presence, vast and continuous, and completely unimpressed by any of the human drama occurring at their feet. She thought about Malenkov in the secure transport ahead of them, about the 3 months he had spent in a room with her father, about 17 years of choices made in the wrong direction by a man who understood the framework and refused it. She did not feel sympathy for him. Sympathy was too simple a word for what she felt, too clean. What she felt was closer to the complicated recognition of someone looking at a version of a road she had also traveled in a different direction with a different ending, and understanding that the difference between their roads was not ability or intelligence or circumstance, but a single, repeating, daily choice about what to do with the weight. She had tried to put the weight down. He had tried to weaponize it. And they had both, in their different ways, ended up in the same Afghan mountains in the same morning light, face to face with the consequence of the choice. At 1340, the vehicle reached the FOB. Colonel Whitfield was waiting at the gate. Not because that was standard protocol, it was not standard protocol. He was waiting because he was the kind of leader who understood that some moments in an operation required the presence of the person with the most authority, and this was one of them. He looked at Megan when she stepped out of the vehicle. Looked at her the way he had looked at her in the small room with the metal table and the bad overhead light, with the patient eyes of a man who was reading something more than surface. "Carter," he said. "Sir, walk with me." They walked. Not toward the operations building, not toward the intelligence processing facility where Malenkov was being received. Toward the quieter end of the base, where the noise of operations fell away enough that two people could have a conversation that was just a conversation. "Give me the honest version," Whitfield said. "Not the report version." The honest version. She gave it to him. Everything, the counter-ambush she had recognized, the decision to make contact, the 80 meters of open ground, the conversation with Malenkov. The things he had said about her father, the framework. The 17 years, the voluntary surrender. Whitfield listened without interrupting, which was his gift and his discipline. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He surrendered because of what your father tried to give him 17 years ago," he said, in a manner of speaking. "Yes, sir, and your father never knew." "No, sir." Whitfield looked at the mountains on the horizon, the distant permanence of them. "Raymond Carter spent 3 months trying to give a man something the man refused to take," he said, "and 17 years later, the echo of those 3 months produced a voluntary surrender that is going to yield intelligence saving we don't know how many lives yet. But the estimate from Calloway's team is significant." He paused. "Your father's work has a very long shadow, Carter." She felt the weight shift on her shoulders, the same shift she had felt in the medical tent when Daniel said Raymond Carter's name out loud. The acknowledgement of something true that has been present all along but unsaid. "Yes, sir," she said. "How are you doing with all of it?" It was the same question Jake kept asking. She was beginning to understand that the people worth trusting were the ones who kept asking it. "I'm processing, sir," she said. "I think I'm going to be processing for a while." "That's appropriate." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "Carter, what you did over the past 72 hours, the engagement in the valley, the intelligence work, the operational planning, and particularly the call you made this morning to approach, rather than engage, that is the kind of judgment that takes most people a career to develop. Some people never develop it." He held her gaze. "You didn't hide it because you lacked confidence in your ability. You hid it because you were afraid of what the ability required from you." She said nothing. "You're not afraid of it anymore," he said. "That much is clear." "No, sir, I'm not afraid of it. I just understand it better." He nodded. Slowly, the nod of a man who recognizes a distinction that matters. "Designated marksman is the right designation," he said, "but it's probably not the right ceiling. I'll be making additional recommendations in my report." He paused. "Whatever you decide to do with this career going forward, more of the same, different direction, something we haven't discussed yet, you need to know that the door is open. Wider than it was a week ago." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank. Your father built the foundation, you built the rest." He looked at her one more time with those patient evaluating eyes. "Go get some sleep, Carter. You've earned it." She did not sleep. She went to the medical tent instead because there was someone else she needed to talk to before any of it could settle into place correctly. Daniel was sitting up further than he had been the previous visits, more color in his face, less medication in his eyes, the clear improvement of a body that had decided to start winning its argument with the injury. He was working through some paperwork one-handed, which he set aside when she entered without being asked. She sat, He looked at her face and read what was there with the efficiency of a man who had spent years reading environments for information. "You got him," he said. A pause. "Voluntarily?" "Yes." Daniel absorbed that. The processing happened visibly. She could see him revising his expectation, updating the model, arriving at a version of events he had not anticipated and was now integrating. "How?" he said. She told him. The whole version, including the things she had already told Whitfield, including the things about her father. Daniel listened with the same quality of attention he had given her in the previous visits, fully present, nothing held back. The complete focus of a man who understood that some conversations were worth every bit of attention you had. When she got to the part about Malenkov standing in the open with his hands visible, using the American signal her father had taught him, Daniel's jaw tightened. Not with anger. With something more complicated, the response of a man encountering a fact that is simultaneously beautiful and terrible and does not resolve easily into one or the other. When she got to Malenkov saying, "You have his eyes," Daniel looked away for a moment. Just for a moment, then back. When she finished, it was quiet for a long time. "He tested you," Daniel said finally. "He engineered the whole thing to test whether the lesson took." "Yes, and you passed the test by not treating it as a test." She thought about that. "I wasn't thinking about passing anything. I was thinking about what the situation actually required. That's what passing looks like." She looked at her hands. The hands that had been steady at every moment that mattered. The hands that had carried Daniel's rifle and cleaned Daniel's rifle. And finally, when there was no alternative, fired Daniel's rifle to save the lives of men who had called her loader for 11 months. "Chief," she said, "Megan." First time he had used her name. The first name, she felt the shift in it. "He said my father was proud of me," she said. Malenkov. "He said my father told him he had a daughter who could shoot. That he was proud in a quiet way." Daniel said nothing. He looked at her with the full weight of 8 years of following her father's doctrine. "I know he was," Daniel said. "I didn't know him personally. But I know his work, and his work built you. And what you did over the past 3 days, he stopped. Started again. A man builds things because he believes the thing he is building matters. Your father believed you mattered. Every lesson he gave you, every hour he spent making the calculation automatic, every conversation about the weight and the framework, and the hardest decision that was not a training program. That was Raymond Carter telling his daughter, 'You are worth everything I know.'" The tears arrived without warning or permission, the way real ones do. Not dramatic too, at the corners of her eyes, the physical expression of something that had been held tightly in a specific container for 3 days and had finally found the exact right moment to release. She did not apologize for them. Daniel did not comment on them. He simply waited the way good people wait, without embarrassment and without performing comfort, just present, just there. She cleared them with the back of her hand, took a breath. "I need to go home," she said. "I know, when the deployment ends." "Maryland."
His grave.
"Yes," he paused.
Take Morales with you.
She looked at him. "He's the kind of person who should be there for that," Daniel said. "And he'll want to go. Even if he doesn't say so, he'll want to go." She thought about Jake sleeping in the vehicle on the way back. The loose hands. The unself-conscious exhaustion of someone who had given everything they had and was resting without reservation. "Yeah," she said, "he will." The intelligence debrief ran for 6 hours the following day. Megan sat at the table across from Calloway's team and answered every question with the precision of someone who had been paying very close attention to everything that happened over the past 72 hours. And she had been, because paying attention was what she did. It was what she had always done. It was the baseline function of the brain her father had spent years shaping into an instrument for exactly this kind of work. Malenkov's intelligence was extensive. The operational details that emerged in the processing were things that Calloway described to Megan at the end of the second day of debriefing with the carefully contained expression of an intelligence officer who was trained not to show reaction to information, but was finding the containment more difficult than usual. 4 active operational cells whose command structures were now compromised. 2 training pipelines that had been producing precision-capable fighters for the past 3 years, now identified and targeted for disruption. 1 planned operation 3 weeks from execution that had been designed to kill specific coalition personnel in a coordinated attack across 2 provinces. That last one made Calloway set her pen down. That operation would have been significant, she said, choosing the word carefully in the way that intelligence people choose words when they are describing something whose actual magnitude they are not willing to fully verbalize. How significant, Megan said. Calloway looked at her for a moment. Let's say your 47-page file on Malenkov is going to have a substantial addendum about what his cooperation prevented. Megan sat with that, the weight of the prevented thing, all those lives that would not know they had been preserved because a man in Afghan mountains had decided 17 years too late to pick up the framework Raymond Carter had offered him. Her father's framework, still working, still protecting people. From beyond the grave through the worst student he ever had, arriving at the right outcome by the most circuitous and costly possible route. She thought that is exactly the kind of thing that would have made Raymond Carter laugh until he cried and then go very quiet and then say something true and simple that would take her years to fully understand. She missed him. She missed him in the specific, precise way that she had not allowed herself to miss him for 6 years, because missing him meant acknowledging everything he had tried to give her and everything she had tried to refuse. She was done refusing. At 1700, Jake found her at the armory. She was performing the maintenance check on her rifle. Of course she was. It was what she did when she needed her hands to do something while her mind did something else. Jake understood this by now. She could tell by the way he sat down without asking and waited without filling the silence immediately. Calloway's team briefed Torres, he said after a moment. I have 4 cells, 2 pipelines, 1 operation 3 weeks out. Yes, that's a lot of people who are going to go home because of what happened here. She cycled the action, set the bolt, inspected with the automatic care that had become as natural as breathing. Yes, she said. Jake was quiet for a moment, then your dad. Raymond Carter-like. Not the marksman, the person she thought about it, the honest picture. Not the legend she had spent enough time carrying the legend. The person, patient, she said, in a way that sometimes drove me crazy because I was young and I wanted answers fast and he always made me work for them. He would answer a question with a question and you had to follow it to the actual answer yourself. She paused. He laughed a lot, not at jokes, at situations, at the irony of things. He found the world genuinely funny in a way that wasn't cynical. He loved coffee and he was terrible at cooking anything that wasn't breakfast food. He called me every Sunday at 9 in the morning, and if I didn't answer, he left a voicemail that was exactly 30 seconds long, regardless of how much or how little he had to say. She paused. He was the most principled person I have ever known, and the most human, both at the same time. He didn't treat those things as opposites. Jake listened to all of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment that had the quality of genuine respect rather than just the pause before a response. I want to hear more about him, he said. Not now. Later, when you've had time. Later, she agreed. Maryland? Maryland, he nodded. The nod that meant the decision was made and he was in it. I have another question, he said. Okay, what are you going to do next, career-wise? After this deployment, she thought about it. Whitfield's words wider door than it was a week ago. Calloway's team and the way they had looked at her across the table. Daniel's voice in the medical tent. The clarity she had felt at the edge of the camp before they moved in, everything resolved and present and true. I don't know the specific shape of it yet, she said. But I know I'm not hiding anymore. Good, I know I'm carrying this forward. Whatever comes next, operations, training, something else, I'm not putting the rifle away again. Also good, she paused. Set the rifle down. Looked at him directly. I know that my father spent his career trying to pass something on. And the thing he was trying to pass on is not a shooting technique. It's a way of understanding what the ability is for and what it costs, and how to carry both of those things at the same time without being destroyed by either. She paused. He didn't fail with Malenkov. He planted something that took 17 years and almost certainly more suffering than either of them intended. But it took, and my job going forward is to be the proof of what it looks like when it takes it the right way. Jake looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is the thing he wanted you to know. I know, she said. I just needed the mountains and the rifle and a man with his hands open to figure it out. 3 months later, the deployment ended. The team flew home in pieces, different flights, different timelines. The fragmented return of a unit that had been assembled for a specific purpose and was now dispersing back into the larger structure of an organization that would reassemble them differently for the next purpose. Daniel Reeves, cleared for travel 2 weeks before the official end of deployment, shook Megan's hand on the tarmac at the forward operating base with his left arm still in a partial sling and his right hand extended, and his eyes fully present in the way that eyes are when someone is making sure a moment is recorded. Thank you for keeping my rifle calibrated, he said. She looked at him. Thank you for letting me. Something in his face, the acknowledgement of 11 months and everything they had meant and everything they had led to. He'd be proud, Daniel said. Not qualified, not probably or I think. Just he'd be proud. She held the handshake for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. I know, she said. It was the first time she had said those words and fully meant them. Stephen said goodbye with a nod and a good working with you. Carter that contained, in its economy, everything a man like Stevens would ever say about anything that mattered. She received it the way it was given fully, without requiring more than what was there. Reed, who was 38 and had the patient eyes of a man who had stopped being surprised by things, gave her a brief hug that lasted exactly the right amount of time and said, "Don't disappear again." I won't, she said. You've got things to do. Yes. Do them. Yes. He walked to his transport. Jake drove her to the flight line himself, which was completely unnecessary and completely in character. They did not talk much on the drive. The silence between them had become the kind of silence that doesn't need filling the silence of two people who have been through something real together and understand that the being through it is more permanent than anything they could say about it. At the flight line, he helped her with her gear. He did it in the specific way he did everything practically, without drama, as though helping were simply the obvious response to a person having things that needed to be carried. She thought, there's the irony. The girl who spent 11 months as the person who carried things, now standing on a flight line being helped by the person who had been paying attention all along. Maryland, he said. Maryland, she confirmed. 2 weeks? 3, I have processing first. 3 weeks. He nodded. I'll be there, she looked at him. You don't have to. Carter. His voice was patient and certain in the way that patient and certain people are when they have heard the same unnecessary disclaimer before. I know I don't have to. I want to. He sounds like someone whose grave deserves to be visited by more than one person. She looked at him for a moment. He does, she said. Then it settled. The flight was called. She picked up her bag, adjusted the strap. Her rifle was checked and secured, not on her back, for the first time in months, but present, accounted for, part of the inventory of who she was. Jake, she said. Yeah. My father used to say that the people worth keeping are the ones who are still there when the complicated part starts. He looked at her, waiting. You were there from the first complicated moment, she said. All the way through. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the particular simplicity of a person who says exactly what they mean, there wasn't anywhere else I was going to be. She nodded, picked up the last bag, walked toward the aircraft. She did not look back, not because the leaving was easy. Because she was a person who walked toward things now, not away from them. The looking back version of herself had lived in the F-phobe for 11 months carrying other people's ammunition. That version had served its purpose. It had kept her in the field. It had kept her close to the work without requiring her to be the full version of herself. The full version boarded the aircraft. The full version sat down and buckled in and felt the lift of the departure and watched the mountains of Afghanistan become smaller through the window, not disappearing, never disappearing, just becoming the right size, the size that allows you to carry them with you without being crushed. 3 weeks later, November in Maryland is the honest version of autumn, not the pretty postcard version, but the real version, the one where the trees have given up their leaves in the sky, is the specific gray of something working through something difficult. And the cold is dry and direct and does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. The cemetery was quiet. Megan stood at her father's grave with Jake beside her, and a single thing in her hands that she had carried from Afghanistan, not the rifle, not the file, not any artifact of the mission. A single round of ammunition, unspent. The kind her father had taught her to treat as a promise rather than a threat. The headstone had his name and his rank and his dates, and the words he had requested himself years before he needed them. He gave what he had to give. She stood there for a long time. Jake stood slightly behind her and to the left, the way he had stood in the valley during the ambush, close enough to be present, far enough to give her space to be inside the moment fully. She did not have a speech prepared. She had not planned what she was going to say. She had learned, over the past 3 months, that the most important things do not benefit from preparation, they benefit from honesty, which is different. I found him, she said, quiet, direct to the headstone and to the man it marked. Malenkov, your student who didn't take the framework. He took it eventually, in the most complicated and costly way possible. But he took it, she paused again. He said you were proud of. In a quiet way, he said you told him. The wind moved through the cemetery. Cold and direct and honest. I was angry at you, she said. For not telling me about him. For carrying that alone. For protecting me from it, she held the round in her hand. I understand why you did it. You didn't want me to feel responsible for what he became. You didn't want me to carry your failure. She stopped. But Dad, it wasn't a failure. I need you to know that. Whatever happened in those 3 months, whatever he refused to take from you, it was still in him. 17 years later, it was still in him. You planted something that took a very long time to grow. But it grew. Jake did not move. He was simply there, the steady presence of a person who understood that bearing witness was its own kind of service. I spent 6 years putting the rifle away, she said. I thought I was running from the weight. I wasn't. I was running from the responsibility. The same thing you tried to show me my whole life. I finally understand it now, Dad, not as a lesson. As something I actually believe. She looked at the headstone. You built something real, and I'm going to carry it forward the right way. Not hidden, not sideways, forward. She knelt. She placed the round against the base of the headstone. A single unspent bullet, standing upright, catching the November light. A promise, not a threat. She stood. Jake put his hand on her shoulder once brief, the touch of someone who has been trusted and knows the weight of that trust. She covered his hand with hers for a moment, then she straightened. She stood at her father's grave in the honest cold of a Maryland November, and she was not Loader, and she was not the woman nobodied, and she was not the person running from the responsibility of her own ability. She was Megan Carter, designated marksman, Raymond Carter's daughter. The woman who had carried other people's ammunition for 11 months and emerged from the mountains of Afghanistan carrying something heavier and more permanent, the full inheritance of a life spent. Choosing what to protect rather than what to destroy. She had been the one nobody remembered. The world would not make that mistake again. And the rifle on her back was not a weapon anymore. It was a promise kept.